The Japanese population decreased by 800,000 people last year, and this is going to accelerate to a rate of 1 million people a year for the foreseeable future, with very low fertility rate of 1.3% and political leaders that have been kicking down the road the can for the past 30 years. There are no easy solution in sight. This is really bad news for the third and soon to be fourth economy in the world. And we're going to look today at the 5 biggest issues this is creating and maybe some quick fix solution to try to alleviate a bit the situation. And we're going to start with issue number 1, the lack of manpower. According to Recruit Works Institute, by 2040, there's going to be a lack of 11 million workers in Japan. It's absolutely enormous. And already today, we are missing 13,000 of them. And this is going to accelerate very fast because in 2026, only 2 years from today, there's going to be a lack of 1 million people. This is a very difficult situation and it's going to hit all the possible sectors of the industry. I'm going to tell you a bit about all of the sectors right now: that transportation, construction, manufacturing, sales and merchandising, caregiving, customer and food services, as well as healthcare, and finally clerical staff. So basically all the sectors are being touched, and we can talk about innovation, automatization and all of the process improvement, but that's not going to be enough given the amount of people, number of people I should say, that are going to be missing. It's not an easy situation, and to paraphrase Prime Minister Kishida earlier this year, the society itself is on the brink of not being able to function anymore. And this second point should be no surprise for anybody. With so little people, we are in a very tight labor market. The job to applicant ratio is 1.29. It's better than it was at the beginning of the year, but it's still quite tight, and actually it's going to get tighter and tighter as people continue retiring and very few people enter the workforce. When I say very few people, very few young people entering the workforce. This is putting pressure on companies because they have problems filling their vacancies. It's putting pressure on the salaries, and the wages have to increase to basically bring more people to attract those talents. And the young people entering the workforce now have a little bit more power on their side because they know it's so tight, so they are more likely to jump ship easily if something bothers them or if they're not happy about what they are saying. And we're actually starting to see that if you jump ship, basically it have more chances of bringing you an increase in salary. We're seeing here 10%, and from a personal experience as well, I'm seeing a lot more people being pickier. It's very difficult to actually find people, young people, and they command higher salaries. Now, if we go macro level, if we look at the country as a whole, the country has trouble as well, because if we have less population and less workforce, mathematically and automatically, you have less people consuming as well as less people are earning money, so less people paying taxes. And if you have less taxes, the country has less money to do a lot of the things that a country has to do. And if we look at the last general budget that was pushed through, there was already a gap of $365 billion. So one could say that you can increase taxes to bring in more tax receipt, but it's obviously politically a very difficult subject. If you can't increase basically the taxes and your tax receipts are going down, it means that this gap is bigger, this hole in your budget is bigger, and actually the general budget is calling for an additional $250 billion in debt on top of the existing debt. And Japan is actually the most indebted country in the world in terms of developed countries, because now it's up to 264% of the GDP, and that's absolutely massive, especially if you look at the average of the OECD, that's 122%. It's already not good, but it's more than double than that, so it's really not easy. So for a country like Japan that has a population that's getting older, that needs to be taken care of, that's retiring, and that's going to take a lot of pension, and at the same time you don't have a lot of people to bring more tax receipt, this is a very difficult situation to sustain. Where is the money going to come from? And that brings us to the next point, because Japan is also in a very specific geography and it needs to maintain its services and especially its armed forces. Japan is a very big country in terms of size. From north to south, it's 3,000 kilometers, which is about 1,900 miles for you folks who are not on the meter system. This is a very long country. There are a lot of islands you need to protect. And of course, geopolitically, we know the tension that are in this area. So it's very important to have an armed force, a very strong armed force. And actually, Japan at the beginning of the year brought a new defense budget that was the largest increase since World War II. Where is the money gonna come from that? There were talks about new taxes. They already backtrack on that, but it's gonna come back because that's a lot of money. And I just talked about the problem of having all the tax receipts. And the Japanese military, called the Japanese Self-Defense Force, has about 247,000 active members. How do you bring more people to sustain your army when you want to make it bigger, whether they are active duty or reserve personnel, when you don't have much money and when you don't have the people in the country to join it because you have less and less young people? That's a very difficult situation. I'm sure that the military planners are scratching their heads on how they're gonna be able to balance those two and still keep their very strong military presence. And it's even more difficult. They want to bring more female, but we know as well that they don't treat their new recruit very well all the time. So they have a lot of compounding issues that are gonna basically impact the security of the country and its geopolitical standing. And the fifth point is an obvious one. It's economic decline. We just learned that Q3 in Japan was actually a contraction. The economy went backwards, 0.5% quarter to quarter, but analyzed is minus 2.1%. And although the global economy is slowing down, as we all know, and this is affecting Japan because it's a very globalized economy, there are a lot of domestic factors that are playing into that. Having a growing skilled labor force brings an increase in production capacity, it brings more innovation, and it brings more development. Unfortunately, we are in a situation where the labor force, although skilled, is actually reducing. A smaller population means smaller production, as I mentioned, smaller innovation, but also smaller consumption. And domestic consumption in Japan represents 53% of the GDP, so more than half of the growth, of the economic growth and economic power comes from the consumption. The Japanese population, they're gonna receive smaller wages, and their wages are already quite lower compared to international standards, even though they grew a little bit more, and there's inflation on top, so they are really being double punched. Everywhere we look at it, the economy has very little potential to grow, maybe a bit on the export with the very weak yen, but the import are also very expensive. So really, if we're looking at the mid to long term, the Japanese economy has nowhere to continue growing. At best, it's gonna be just stable, but it's probably gonna decrease because of this lack of population, manpower, and everything that comes from it. So I just painted a very dark picture for Japan. There are fortunately a couple of solutions that can be put into place to alleviate a bit the situation and try to progressively turn it around. So the first one is increasing the labor participation of female and senior citizens. So in Japan, basically, if we look at male to female ratio, male have 71% labor participation, whereas female have 52%. It's getting better, to be honest, but still a big gap. So there's a lot of work to be done there. There's a lot of things to change socially, as well as with companies. They have to make sure that they accommodate and that they bring back months after their maternity leave into their old jobs, and they make all the arrangements that we know in the West to making sure that they continue participating, so you have more people that are available to work. And it's not only women we should be talking about, senior citizens as well. In Japan, 60 to 65 years old is the age when you traditionally retire, but people have long life expectancy and they are quite healthy in Japan. So people can continue working, and actually we can see that a lot of people want to continue working after that. So there are arrangements that need to be made so those people can continue working and not just retire and do nothing, or when I say nothing, not participating full-time in the work. Labor laws and policies have finally changed. When I arrived 25 years ago, it was quite traditional. It is progressing, whereby dads can take paternity leave for longer, and they can actually take it. It was frowned upon. It's still frowned upon in some places, but more and more they can take it. Longer maternity leave as well. So this needs to change to be able to bring people to have more kids, but it's not a burden. So when you have kids, you don't have to stop working. You can actually have a full-time job while having kids that are very young and go to school. For example, it's very difficult to have daycare spot. There are very few daycares in Japan, and even when you can find a spot for daycare, you have to pick up your kid at 5 p.m. or 5:30. You can't have a full-time job and be able to pick up your kids so early in the day, especially when you have to commute a long time like you do in Japan. So there are needs for more daycare that are more flexible, and they don't have all to be government run. They can be run by communities. There are a lot of things happening now in Japan to try to make things easier, because the government is a bit slow. It's a slow machine to take decisions, and all of that is actually something that's being looked upon. And there's a proverb that says it takes a village to raise a child, and that's exactly what's happening. I recommend you read a lot of the links I'm going to put down below about all the initiatives that are going on, and all those links are coming from someone that's very, very good on that and very versed in this subject, and her name is Nobuko Kobayashi. She's a consultant. I've had the pleasure of working with her with a very short period of time. She's very smart. She knows a lot of things. So you have all the links down below if you want to know more about that. And I should also mention Chris Delcourt, who gave me a lot of hints about everything you are hearing in this video. Obviously, the other aspect is to try to use innovation and automation to make more with less. So a lot of companies are already starting to look down that path, and there's a lot of technology in Japan and a lot of things that can be done. Another avenue is through training and making sure that there's less waste in the work that everybody is doing. So training people to be more efficient and having a hard look, giving a hard look at all the companies. So basically it's taking out a lot of red tape. And if we look at the stats, again, coming from the Recruit Works Institute, actually more than 20% of the people that they have talked to think that a third of their job is wasteful and not necessary. That's a lot. And it's actually coming from every level of any companies. Look at that. And the final point is actually the most explosive one, is opening the doors to immigration. So especially in Japan, less than 3% of the population is foreign born. It is a very little number, and it's an explosive political subject. Japan is a very uniform country, so that's not something I'm holding my breath too much about. But if we're looking at how quickly the population or the working population is declining, there's going to be a need to have people coming to help. Otherwise, it stops functioning, as Prime Minister Kishida is saying. And there are a lot of workers from all over the world that would be happy to come in Japan. It's not only the trainees, the 3-year program of training that they have, and people go back home and they are not as well paid. People need to come for specific work, be paid like any Japanese workers, like any workers, to bring their skills. And if we look again at all the industry we talked about earlier, you can see that you do not need to have a fantastic language skill to be able to do all those main jobs. You're gonna learn over time. And if you already know how to do these jobs back home, wherever you're coming from, you can do them in Japan with very little training. And if it's about caregiving or health, I would understand that you need a bit more Japanese, but if you are already qualified in your home country, you should be able to come. And from testimonies that I've had personally from my contacts around, caregivers coming from Southeast Asia are really, really well appreciated. They're very well trained, and they can do a great job, and that's going to be so important when we have so many people retiring. Japan is not the only developed country in the world with demographic problem, but this situation is dire than most because of its very specific politics, history and geography. I sincerely hope that the Japanese government takes swift and decisive action to course correct before it's too late. I hope that for Japan, as well as for myself as a long-time resident of this country. If you're interested in learning more about Japan, I have prepared those videos for you to dig deeper. If you like this video or learned something, please give a like and subscribe, and do not hesitate to leave any comments down below. Thank you again for watching, and until next time, goodbye.